I think for me the main issue is quite simply that in order to produce electricity with a nuclear power station, my generation is going to leave toxic waste in West Somerset for possibly tens of thousands of years, and nobody knows what to do with that. And all I'm really doing is passing on the problem to my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and so on. And I just don't think that can actually be justified. I think that if it were the case that we couldn't have the kind of energy consumption we have now without nuclear, I would still be opposed to nuclear, because I can do with less, if that means that I'm not giving that legacy to future generations.
Right, so if it's, say, a choice between having Hinkley C leaving a legacy of radioactive pollutants to the future generations of your family line, or using less electricity, you're going to go for using less electricity.
Yeah, totally. It amazes me that this is the one process where you don't have to account for the waste. You know, if I wanted to open a fish and chip shop in Glastonbury, I would have to have a plan which told you where every last drop of dirty chip oil was going to go. And I wouldn't get planning permission if I didn't have that plan. But Hinkley C got planning permission without any real plan for the waste. Of course, there is a supposed plan, and there's a promise that there will be a hole and that the nuclear waste will go into the hole eventually. But the hole hasn't been built.
Is this a mythical hole that I've never seen yet?
It's a mythical hole.
Telling me is going to be out there.
It's going to happen one day. It's called the GDF, the Geological Disposal Facility, and one day it will be dug if they can find someone who wants to have it. But more and more we're picking up signals that actually Hinkley Point is being considered as a second waste dump.
Second. First being
Sellafield.
Right.
Sellafield is where all the waste is at the moment, including waste which was created in the 50s, which they've now lost the paperwork for, and nobody actually knows what the waste is.
Wait a minute. So the early nuclear plants that were in the 50s, the first ones that Britain had, the first operating nuclear power plants for electricity generation anywhere in the world, they've lost the paperwork for the nuclear waste from that process.
Yeah.
So they now have nuclear waste that's being stored, but they don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah. And that I think is, you know, again, it's like...
That's only 60 years ago.
But I think that's really important to notice that, because that's what happens in 60 years. And it happens everywhere. And the idea that it won't happen again, I think is ridiculous, because the truth is, you know, departments close, change. Company like EDF, are they going to exist in 100 years' time? This nuclear power plant will supposedly finish generating in 2070, 2080.
Right.
In reality, they'll probably extend its life for another 10 years, because that's what they always do. So let's say at the end of the century, they've got to then move those fuel rods into pools where they have to cool for 100 years. Another 100 years in West Somerset. They have to be looked over by people who will not be getting any benefit from that plant. It will be finished.
Right.
And they're hoping that EDF exists, that the Department of the Environment exists, that all the regulatory bodies exist, that everybody can remember what it was they were meant to do, and that all the spare parts and the technology that we have now will be in existence. And that in the meantime,
it's a big ask, isn't
it's
it?
a big ask. And in the meantime, in the next 2 centuries, there won't be any major disruptive events which dislocate society and mean that process of steady monitoring gets broken.
Or
no
geological or weather-related issue.
Totally. There's any number of things.
Because, of course,
if you look
Sellafield
back,
is on the coast, and so is Hinkley.
If you look back over the last 200 years and see how many huge events occurred, then that's what we can expect in the next 200 years.
When you say huge events, you're referring to geological and or weather-related events?
I'm talking about 2 world wars.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
An epidemic which killed tens of thousands of people in this country. A Great Depression. You know, anything can happen in the next 100 years, and probably will. And in 200 years, for sure.
Right.
So the idea that you can make a plan on paper which describes a process which will be carried out by people who haven't been born yet is really, really irresponsible
Whose
in my opinion.
parents haven't been born yet.
And I want to make
clear
this
about
point,
it.
Mark.
Yeah.
I want to make this point,
Yeah.
which is that it's the way a lot of our society works at the moment is that it is incredible level of negligence and irresponsibility, but that we're in denial about that. We think that if I've hired someone to write a good plan with the right words, which ticks all the correct boxes, that the reality has been taken care of. But the reality is always much harder and much more difficult than what you've written on a piece of paper. And so it's one thing to say, I will deal with the waste later. But to say, people who haven't been born yet will deal with the waste, I'm sure, is, I think, it's tantamount to, it's an abuse of the human rights of those people. It's like you're putting that on them whether they like it or not, and you're assuming that they're going to have the resources and the knowledge to deal with it. And that isn't a safe assumption at this time.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because, of course, the main reason that nuclear has been sold to us now is because it's a low-carbon technology, and we need low-carbon because
It's clean.
we have to save the
clean
climate.
Technology. Yeah.
The whole point is they're acknowledging climate change, but they're not acknowledging the impact it may have on nuclear power stations. This is only part of a vision that the nuclear industry has for a global renaissance. Nuclear power stations all over the world, saving humanity from climate change. As society breaks down, if it does, every one of those becomes a potential disaster on the scale of Fukushima, and we leave all those toxic time bombs around the world.
Yeah.
We also leave the means for making nuclear weapons around the world. Again, whatever agreements are signed today mean nothing in 50 or 100 years' time.